Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow-up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Bloomburrow Animated Army Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or my Game Nerds affiliate links in the description if you really like it, and be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon will be covering next. Also, if you'd like to see my blind reaction and thoughts to the base Precon before any upgrades, you can do so by checking out my first impressions of it also in the description. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Bello, Bard of the Brambles, a 3/3 raccoon bard that costs 1 and Gruul that has the following ability. During our turn, each non-equipment artifact and each non-aura enchantment we control of mana value 4 or greater is a 4/4 elemental creature in addition to its other types, as well as gain indestructible haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Breaking down his core stats, Bello is sporting a lightweight CMC, an average stat block for his cost, and an ability that turns a good portion of high CMC backrow pieces into resilient creatures that we can not only swing in with, but also generate us repeatable card advantage. Now, on the surface, this enables us to get a lot more damage on the table during our turn, which, considering our color's robust high-cost enchantment and artifact arsenal, and its access to arguably the best ramp in the game, should easily enable us to assemble 8/8, 12/12, or even higher numbers of indestructible bodies on board to swing in with, putting our opponents in the awkward position of either blocking our indestructible 4/4s, generally losing at least some of their blockers in the process, or letting them through for damage for them and card advantage for us. But honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this ability's potential, as it also provides us with a lot more, less obvious benefits, such as treating enchantments and artifacts as creatures as they enter the battlefield on our turn so they can proc our ETB payoffs, allowing vehicles to functionally crew themselves as hasty indestructible 4/4s instead of their printed stat blocks, affecting enchantment and artifact creatures as well for a potential stat bump, added resilience, and ability to swing in as soon as they come down, and, for deck building purposes, allowing us to more reasonably play quote-unquote do-nothing artifacts and enchantments that are otherwise too slow, since, at worst, there's still going to be a 4/4 indestructible body that can swing in the turn they come down and potentially replace themselves. Now, having said all that, this ability does come with two major downsides. The first being that our commander needs to be on board, as the instant he leaves the battlefield, all our artifacts and enchantments cease to be creatures, even in the middle of combat, meaning that our opponents will be doing their level best to remove Bello from the board to stop him from animating our back row, and we'll need to invest in at least a handful of ways to keep him alive against these attempts. And secondly, Bello's ability only functions on our turn, leaving us very vulnerable to crackback if we go all in on back row pieces, meaning we'll need to invest in at least some ways to screen attacks unless we want our opponents to simply beat us down on their turns. So, as we can see, Bello is a commander that can turn our back row into a terrifying source of damage and card advantage that suffers from some glaring weaknesses that we'll need to shore up if we want to get actual usage out of it, which is why in this upgrade, we'll be aiming to A. Mitigate those weaknesses by adding in a variety of ways to protect Bello against removal, and build up our board state through back row sources of tokens that we can use to screen attacks for us when it's not our turn or swing in with when it is, and B. Augmenting our back row's ability to deal damage by adding in a variety of AoE keyword, stat boosting, and damage multiplying effects to ensure that our combat phases are as devastating as possible for our opponents. And then to ensure we can get to and generate even more value from our big back row pieces, we'll be pivoting this entire deck into a more enchantress themed direction, primarily because this Precon and Gruul in general has a lot more enchantment support than it does artifact support, so we can ramp to those high CMC enchantments faster and generate additional value from those enchantments outside of Bello, thereby giving Bello all the support he needs to give our opponents a thorough back row beatdown. So let us make our way back to Bloomburrow, but this time to one of its newly opened Omen paths, which is where we're most likely to find Bello off adventuring. Even before these multiversal pathways opened, Bello had always been a traveler, exploring every inch of Bloomburrow and amassing stories and trinkets to entertain the townsfolk when he passed through more civilized areas. But now, the entire multiverse was his to traverse, and traverse it he has, braving the swamps of Urborg on Dominaria to obtain ancient Thran artifacts, traveling deep into Icoria's wilderness to obtain its rare crystals, and even climbing the massive hedrons on Zendikar to add one of the smaller ones to his collection. Then, using his unique brand of magic, he can manifest the spirits of these trinkets for onlookers when he finally returns to his home plane, their imposing elemental forms making his tales even more impressive. But do keep an eye out for any out-of-place artifacts when traversing the multiverse, like a filigree cog in one of Eldraine's forests, or Stitcher's tools in the temple ruins on Theros, since these more than likely once belonged to Bello, as even more impressive than his collection of trinkets is the amount of them he has lost throughout his adventures. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and his playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, considering that we'll be taking this build in a more enchantment-themed direction to make better use of Gruul's better enchantment support, it should come as no surprise that we'll start off by adding in a suite of new CMC 4+ enchantments to the build, supplementing the base build's already admittedly powerful ones to ensure that Bello has plenty of backrow to animate. Starting off with some more value-oriented upgrades, on the card advantage side of things, we'll be replacing Garruk's Pack Leader, which is a serviceable draw source but a bit too off-theme and mana-intensive to be used here, with Guardian Project, which will proc off all our enchantments since they ETB as creatures for basically the same card advantage for 1 mana less that we can swing in with more reliably, and Cutting Grothama All-Devouring, which is much too awkward to use as a draw source outside of a deck designed specifically around its gimmick for Eidolon of Blossoms, which again benefits from Bello bumping its resilience and stats while turning all our enchantments into even more card advantage as they come down. Then on the ramp side of the equation, we'll be scrapping Burnished Heart, whose land ramp is serviceable but pales in comparison to the mana dorks and land ramp the base build already gives us, in favor of Nature's Will, which can untap all our lands for a huge boost to our mana generation if even one of our animated enchantments gets in for damage. And then as some additions that do a little from column A and a little from column B, we'll be swapping out Big Score, Alchemist's Talent, and Reign of Riches, whose treasure generation and treasure payoffs are indeed useful but would find a better home in more dedicated treasure decks than they would here, in order to swap in Court of Bounty, Case of the Locked Hothouse, and Glorious Sunrise in their place, all of which provide us with even more ramp and draw, the first by making us the Monarch and functionally netting us a free land drop each turn, or occasionally a free creature drop instead if we can hold on to the crown for a full rotation, the second actually netting us an additional land drop each turn, and, once we get enough lands in play, lets us play most of our cards off the top of our deck, and the third giving us either passive draw, ramp, life gain, or an AoE stat bump with trample attached depending on what we need for additional flexibility. Now switching gears from value and on to removal so we can deal with our opponent's threats, we'll be letting go of the Planeswalker, Domri, and Ark of Bolas, whose effects are okay but can be somewhat difficult to defend in the early to mid game if we don't hit our token generators, to add in Gimli's Reckless Might, whose AoE haste granting is solid at letting our non-enchantments swing in as soon as they come down, while its easy to trigger fight effect lets us get even more mileage out of our enchantments' relatively high power and indestructibility to pick off our opponent's creatures, as well as cutting the bit too basic draw spell Harmonize to make space for the repeatable damage source Court of Ire, whose free shock a turn is decent enough at dealing with utility creatures, combines nicely with our new damage multipliers, more on those in a second, to inflict even more damage, and also provides draw and potentially even more damage on its own in the form of the Monarch as well. So, having alluded to damage multipliers in the previous entry, and the base build having one built in already, we'll be pumping those numbers even higher by raising the excess cycling lands, Tranquil Thicket and Forgotten Cave, so we can add in City on Fire and Fiery Emancipation, both of which triple the damage any of our sources inflict, functionally allowing our animated enchantments to swing in as indestructible 12/4s individually, or mind-boggling 36/4s when combined, to drastically increase our backrow's damage potential. but we'll be more than capable of cranking those numbers even higher with both the stat boosting effects already included in the base build and the ones we'll be adding here to make all our animated enchantments, as well as the rest of our creature base, even more dangerous, such as by replacing the out-of-place land animating Llanowar Loam Speaker with Gruul Warchant, which provides an offensive AoE power boost and board-wide menace to force our opponents to double block our indestructible back row to prevent our damage and draw, benching the undeniably powerful but slow and somewhat random value piece Evercoat Ursine to make room for Street Riot, which gives us access to another board-wide boost to power as we attack, this time providing our attacking creatures with trample as well to more or less guarantee that we'll be inflicting damage and drawing cards as our enchantments attack, and scrapping the much too expensive removal piece Spine of Isha in favor of Sight of the Scale Lords, which provides a significant boost to power and toughness on attack for our 4+ toughness creatures, which includes all of our animated back row and some of our tokens and normal creatures outside of that, as well as board-wide vigilance so our bigger non-back row pieces can stay up to block for us even after they swing in. Then pivoting to a pair of high CMC protection pieces that we'll be using to keep our board, particularly our commander, alive against our opponent's attempts to remove them, we'll be letting go of the Elder Dinosaurs Itali Primal Storm and Galta Primal Hunger, whose powerful effect in the former's case and raw power in the latter's could have theoretically stayed in to benefit from all our buff effects, but ultimately lose their spots to the AoE targeting protection pieces Asceticism and Archetype of Endurance, both of which provide our entire creature base with hexproof to prevent our commander from being sniped out, and to make our back row almost impossible to deal with on our turn outside of instant speed wipes, with the former providing even more destruction protection with its on-demand regeneration to make our entire board even more resilient, and the latter stripping hexproof off of all our opponent's creatures in order to make otherwise protected targets now vulnerable. And finally, as our last trio of new CMC 4+ enchantments, we'll be augmenting the build's existing creature token generation, both to make up for our low creature count by providing expendable bodies to screen attacks for us, as well as to take advantage of all our stat bumping and keyword granting effects to go on the offensive with alongside our animated enchantments, in which we'll be benching Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsisma, whose cost reduction has almost no use in this build due to our lack of high-power creatures, and whose trample granting has been replaced with our new enchantment additions to the deck, so we can add in Wolfcaller's Howl, which on average can net us between 1 to 3 2/2 tokens each rotation so long as our opponents aren't starved for cards, slotting out Rampaging Baeloths, which is a bit too land-dependent and off-theme to get the most usage here, to slot in Paradox Zone, which creates exponentially bigger tokens each turn, making it fantastic to drop early and build up our board with, and a Shelving Explore, which is honestly just a bad source of ramp in comparison to the better options we already have, to make room for Sandworm Convergence, whose passive 5/5 token creation is a decent way for us to keep our board growing, while its ability to prevent flyers from attacking us serves as a solid silver bullet against particularly flyer-heavy or evasion-dependent decks. Now, having completely overhauled the deck with an impressive array of new enchantments for us to beat down our opponents with, it only makes sense for us to also slot in some ways for us to take advantage of the new and old enchantments this deck has for even more value, which is why we'll be cutting the somewhat out-of-place counter-distributing legend Grumgully the Generous and the treasure-creating Bootlegger Stash, so we can give their spots to Setessan Champion and Enchantress's Presence, both of which turn our enchantments into card advantage as they ETB or as we cast them respectively, with the former also growing itself with counters as our enchantments come down to serve as an ever-growing threat as well, removing the decent but ultimately too off-theme ramp pieces Prosperous Bandit and Gilded Lotus to open up space for Sanctum Weaver and Herald of the Pantheon, both of which help provide more on-theme ramp by either providing mana that scales with the number of enchantments we have in play for a massive mana boost, or by reducing the cost of our enchantments so we can cast more of them back-to-back while padding our life totals as we do so, and lastly, smelting down the too expensive and inefficient Mana Rock Hedron Archive so that its position can be filled by Weaver of Harmony, which is technically a lord for our animated enchantments since they're still enchantments while animated for one final stat boost, while its activated ability allows us to double up on the effects of the most powerful enchantment we have in play by copying it for a single mana. And at last, reaching the end of our upgrades, we'll be adding in a final pair of protection pieces to the build outside of our high CMC enchantments to give our commander just a bit more resilience. Firstly, by replacing the out-of-place burn source Teapot Slinger with the legend Sareth the Viper's Fang, who provides board-wide hexproof to all our other untapped creatures, which is fine since we'll almost never want to attack with our commander anyway, as well as board-wide death touch to all our tapped creatures, making it even harder for our opponents to block our animated enchantments without sustaining casualties, and secondly, by trading the mediocre scalable wipe Starstorm for the modal spell Collective Resistance, which can provide one-time protection from removal by making our commander indestructible, but can also provide solid 2-for-1 backrow removal instead or on top of that if needed for some additional interaction. So, now that we've covered all 25 cards which we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 28 enchantments of mana value 4 or greater, as well as 3 artifacts of mana value 4 or greater, giving Bello plenty of both on and off-theme backrow pieces to animate, 9 cards that care about enchantments specifically or indirectly, giving us a solid number of payoffs for them outside of Bellow for additional value, 9 enchantments that increase our creature's stats, 9 that provide our entire board with keywords, and 3 that multiply damage our creatures and or sources can inflict, giving us a multitude of ways to make our enchantments and, by extension, the rest of our creature base significantly deadlier as we swing in with them, 4 ways to protect our commander from removal to make it as hard as possible for our opponents to interfere with his backrow animation, and 7 sources of tokens to help make up for the build's low creature count, as well as to take advantage of all the AoE buff effects our enchantments provide. For general deck stats, we have 22 ramp sources, 14 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe. Our ramp being much higher than average in this build, mainly to offset the build's high mana curve due to its dependence on CMC 4+ enchantments and artifacts. Speaking of which, this build has an average CMC of 3.98, leaving us with a decently heavy curve that's made significantly more bearable by the final build's impressive ramp package, in which we'll want to ramp hard into our higher CMC enchantments, use our token generation sources to stay alive while we build up our back row, and then bring down Bellow to immediately animate and swing in with said back row. From there, it just becomes a matter of us withstanding our opponent's crackbacks with our tokens and keeping Bellow alive so we can swing in with our ideally empowered animated enchantments, which should enable Bellow to beat down our opponents in a typical, if somewhat untraditional, Gruul fashion. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.37 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we want to add even more upgrades by going over budget, Path of Discovery can be replaced with Molten Echoes, which takes advantage of our animated enchantments also being elementals to create temporary token copies of them for double the damage and double their effects for a turn. Gruul Turf can be terraformed into 3 Tree City, which again makes use of our enchantments also being elementals to provide us with an insane amount of ramp on established boards. And if our need for card advantage is greater than our need for cash, Lotus Cobra can be replaced with Argothian Enchantress, which gives us another way to turn our enchantments into draw that not only protects itself, but also inflicts massive damage to our bank accounts before the game even starts. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the animated army Precon upgrade complete, the next upgrade we'll be tackling will be the token-heavy Squirreled Away Precon and its face commander, Hazel of the Root Bloom. So look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime, however, it's time for all you folks to vote on which of the alternate commanders from the Precons you want to see get a build of their own. Those being either the card drawing and creature cheating Mr. Foxglove, the top deck sneak attacking Arthur Marigold Knight, the enchantment cascading Wild Seer Scouring Maw, or the squirrel empowering the Odd Acorn Gang. So be sure to cast your votes, link in the description, before the deadline on August 24th, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content to help keep this channel growing. Consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee or using my Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you want to support the channel directly. And if you want to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the videos I've made so far. And with that, have a good one, folks, and stay safe.